12 de octubre de 1968, declaro inaugurados los Juegos Olímpicos de México.
The 1960s marked a period of significant progress in Mexico. Free textbooks were given to kids in public schools, urbanization started to grow, and in 1968, the Olympic Games would be hosted at the capital. This raised standards and generated high expectations. Would the facilities be able to accommodate this many people? Was the city safe enough? A major question lingered in the head of Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, the president at the time. What would Mexico be remembered by after the Games? Ordaz wanted this event to be the best it could be. After all, this was the first cultural Olympiad to be held in a Spanish-speaking Latin American developing country. To accommodate for the Olympics, the Mexican government spent close to $175 million, distributed in the following manner: $53 million for sports installations, $16 million for city works, $16 million for the Miguel Hidalgo Olympic Village, $12 million for the Narciso Mendoza Village, and $76 million for the direct expenditures of the organizing committee. Ordaz wanted to showcase the identity of Mexican culture, branding everything with a logo and slogan: "Everything is possible with peace." The games themselves would be hosted during October. Posters were put up, decorations surrounded the stadiums, and even promotional movies were made. However, not everyone in Mexico had the opportunity to rejoice and cheer for this historical moment. In the Tlatelolco district, a movement was beginning to take shape. Weeks before the Olympics took place, the students of several universities would march towards La Plaza de la Constitución, more commonly known as El Zócalo, the main gathering place located near the Palacio Nacional. Their demands were peaceful and simple.
We want freedom for political prisoners, repeal of Article 145 of the Federal Penal Code, the disappearance of the Grenadier Corps, the dismissal of the police chiefs Luis Cueto, Raul Mendiola, and A. Frias. We need compensation to the families of all those killed and injured since the beginning of the conflict, and demarcation of responsibilities of the officials guilty of the bloody events.
However, they wouldn't be met with kindness.
They told me that there was blood on the walls of the buildings, that the elevators were perforated with machine gun bullets, that the glass window of the shops were destroyed, that the tanks were inside the plaza, that there was blood on the staircase of the buildings, that they could hear people shouting, moaning, and crying.
Oriana Fallaci, the Italian journalist who was at the French hospital because she also had been shot, stated that she had placed a long-distance call to the Italian parliament requesting that the Italian delegation boycotted the Olympic Games as an act of repudiation directed at the government of Mexico. The Italian parliament and the effectiveness of this call, according to current data, never followed through. The Italian journalist would then comment on how she had been a war correspondent in Vietnam and that there at least a siren made a sound warning before the bombings or shooting began. She also mentions how Mexico was the only country where she had ever seen soldiers shooting point blank at civilians. Previous historians have tried to construct a timeline for the residents of my country, an image of how the government's corruption and ego got innocent people killed. Sadly, this topic has been so censored that it's hard to find true historical accounts. Even with this status, Mexican folk like me want to keep the popular phrase alive: El 2 de octubre no se olvida. But why? Has it been accurate, or has society washed it aside? To start a discussion, we must first analyze the root of our movement. I've constructed a timeline, analyzed free public school books, and managed to interview several historians to get the most accurate information. The conflict began in July, and according to our first interviewee, Professor Bruno Baruch, the movement itself draws from other international conflicts like the hippie movement and the Cold War.
Nos vamos al contexto en el que se encontraba esto que ha sido englobado como la Guerra Fría, un periodo, es una bipolaridad entre, ya saben, ¿no? El bloque capitalista contra el bloque comunista. Mucha tensión, Unión Soviética contra Estados Unidos, que Latinoamérica empieza a ser un cuadro más de juego de ajedrez que estaban jugando estos dos grupos de poder y que en América Latina no se queda como si nada, empiezan a jugar ahí mismo también, más Estados Unidos que la Unión Soviética. Hasta donde yo tengo entendido, la Unión Soviética no tenía una influencia, ni intentó tener una influencia tan fuerte como Estados Unidos. Estamos hablando de la Operación Cóndor, estamos hablando del apoyo a gobiernos dictatoriales con afinidad capitalista, o más bien anticomunista, que fueran lo que fueran, pero anticomunistas. Antirrojos, ¿no? Antirrojillos, como decían por ahí. Dejamos el contexto internacional y nos vamos al nacional. Tenemos un priato, que es como se le conoce, en donde durante 71 años aproximadamente siempre gobernó el mismo partido político a nivel federal y no se discutía nada al respecto.
These movements rise, and at the time, there is a strong clash between the old people and young adults of Mexico. The old people were still trying to keep a capitalist and patriarchal state, all while the teenagers were trying to break these social norms.
Pero entiéndase que ese movimiento de estudiantil no buscaba una confrontación entre capitalista y comunista. Pero como se trataba de romper con este estatus capitalista patriarcal, empiezan a entender como, entonces si están en contra de este sistema capitalista, entonces son comunistas. Esta manifestación estudiantil que se va a dar en México, pues es inspirado en los movimientos sociales de la década de los 60, y qué tan ridículo o qué tan extraño es el inicio de esta manifestación. La situación es que hubo un partido de fútbol americano. En este partido de fútbol americano se estaban jugando de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México contra el Politécnico Nacional, el IPN. Sí. Es el clásico de clásicos del americano. Lo que sucedió fue que se agarraron a golpes y este pleito se fue hasta las gradas. Y ahí es cuando el gobierno del entonces Distrito Federal decide entrar me parece que es a Ciudad Universitaria, no quiero mentir así, ¿verdad? A la CEU. A CEU, a Ciudad Universitaria, y acabar con detener este pleito, ¿no? Hay datos que dicen que había grupos de choques, están esperando el momento para buscar agredir, ¿no?
This information would be passed down in media outlets as a street fight, but later documents revealed serious contradictions. The Attorney General's Office, PGR, indicate that, in addition to Los Araños and Los Ciudadelos gangs, the joints of Alfonso Torres and Sergio Romero fueled the brawl between the students and the later confrontation with the Grenadiers. On July 25, several student groups, including the Federación Nacional de Estudiantes Técnicos, or FNET, obtained a permit from the Departamento del Distrito Federal that allowed them to protest legally. On the other side, the Central Nacional de Estudiantes Democráticos, the Juventud Comunista, and other small student groups organized a juvenile march against the intense police brutality they were facing. The protest began a day later. The students made their way to Plaza de la Constitución, where they would be met with tear gas and grenadier brutality. The Dirección Federal de Seguridad and the Secret Service occupied the premises of Plaza de la Constitución and the workshops of its newspaper, La Voz de México. Workers were detained, work materials confiscated, and a part of the printing press was destroyed. The PC protested the attacks and denounced the police attempts to make it appear as a sponsor of the riots provoked by the police. Party activists and people unrelated to the events were arrested. The Red Cross treated 30 injured, and 9 of them were hospitalized. Days later, the students organized a formal suspension of 3 high schools from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. This strategy was done as a direct protest targeted towards the increasing police assaults.
Los preparatorianos toman varias de las escuelas y se encierran ahí en forma de huelga y las cierran. Está la de San Ildefonso.
Sí.
La
famosa puerta explotada con un bazucazo.
Con un bazucazo, así es. Esto es previo todavía a la manifestación del 2 de octubre. La idea era intimidar a los estudiantes que estaban ahí. Imagínate, estamos hablando de preparatoria. Se encierran en la prepa y deciden tirar ese bazucazo, destruir la puerta, entrar, a pesar de que lo pudieron hacer de muchas otras maneras. La idea era causar miedo.
Claro. And here, the protests and movements would become more visible, more organized, and gain more support. Some protests would catch the attention of the Mexican president, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz. He would stretch his hand out to anyone willing to formally talk. This inspired the creation of the CNH, the Spanish abbreviation of the National Strike Council, consisting of several scholars and professors from various universities nationwide. These newly formed institutions and justice-hungry scholars would help write a formal set of demands allowing for a planned ideology and a moral path for the movement.
We want freedom for political prisoners, repeal of Article 145 of the Federal Penal Code, the disappearance of the Grenadier Corps, the dismissal of the police chiefs Luis Cueto, Raul Mendiola, and A. Frias. We need compensation to the families of all those killed and injured since the beginning of the conflict, and demarcation of responsibilities of the officials guilty of the bloody events.
One of the most memorable and skipped days was the 28th of August, a date in which a red and black flag was hoisted on the flagpole of the Plaza de la Constitución. The square was populated by hundreds of students who intended to be there until the resolution of the conflict, which was coming to its 35th day. This flag symbolized blood, socialism, rebellion, resistance, and revolution. This moment stands as one of the most iconic for the movement. It wouldn't be until 1 a.m. that, after following a warning of evacuation from the plaza, tanks from the army and several fire trucks came to harass and hurt the students. They all ran towards different streets in a form of defense while screaming chants for freedom and liberty. Let it be known that the Mexican press and media outlets like Excelsior, a well-established newspaper that covered the events very closely and from an official perspective, stated contradicting views. The action to evict the Zócalo was led by General Benjamín Reyes García, commander of the 1st Military Zone, and was in charge of a battalion of paratroopers, the 43rd Army and 44th Infantry, 12 armored cars of the Presidential Guards, 4 fire trucks, 150 patrol cars, and 4 battalions of traffic police. All of these personnel just to stop a peaceful protest hosted by students. This seems a little excessive.
Pues como te comentaba, ahí hay una anécdota de un amigo que en paz descanse, ¿no? Le tocó ese evento y dice que pues ahí murió gente, los balaceó el ejército, los balacearon, su novia muere ahí y él sale herido y logra esconderse, ¿no? Las mismas personas de ahí de los negocios lo dejan meterse ahí y resguardarse.
After the extensive fourth government report, the president addressed the Olympics, reporting that the attempts to disrupt the games have been known for several months, and that during the recent conflicts, several tendencies have been observed. He even stated that
no admito existan presos políticos. Preso político es quien está privado de su libertad exclusivamente por sus ideas políticas, sin haber cometido delito alguno. No obstante, sí se me hace saber el nombre de alguien que esté preso sin proceso judicial en el que se hayan cumplido o se estén cumpliendo las formalidades esenciales del procedimiento, acusados de ideas, no de actos ejecutados, se girarán las órdenes de inmediata e incondicional libertad.
A couple of days later, the members of the board asked for a set of demands to be met. We want to ensure that the talks are based solely on the list of demands we previously stated. We want this meeting to be held solely between representatives of the federal executive branch and the Consejo Nacional de Huelga. These are to begin at the Congressional Unit of the IMSS Medical Center on September 9 at 5 p.m. They are to be held in the presence of the entire National Consejo Nacional de Huelga, the coalition, the national and international press, and advisors from both sides. And they are to be broadcasted on Radio Cadena Nacional and Telesistema Mexicano. Weeks later, on the 13th, the movement would manifest itself in a form of a silent march. The demonstration began at the National Museum of Anthropology and ended in the Zócalo, in a shocking demonstration of the organizational and convening capacity of the National Strike Council. They wanted to show society that the students were not a bunch of rioters who sought to generate instability in the country. As a result of the CNH call, the response was massive and more than 250,000 people attended. Young people also arrived with adhesive tape over their mouths to avoid speaking loudly. The only things that could be heard were murmurs and the footsteps of the young people who, with their banners held high, were asking for public dialogue. This meeting would be so impactful that even Javier Barros Sierra, the UNAM's head dean of the engineering faculty, attended.
Y se hace la famosa Marcha del Silencio, pues las autoridades habían dicho que ellos estaban reaccionando ante agresiones verbales y físicas de los manifestantes. Se ponen un tape, sí, ¿no?, en la boca y se reúnen en la Plaza de las Tres Culturas, allí en los edificios departamentales, y se infiltra un grupo de choque por parte de militares y miembros del Estado Mayor Presidencial. O sea, estamos hablando de personas que solamente reciben órdenes del presidente. Y este es el famoso Batallón Olimpia. Se infiltran como civiles en la manifestación y se identifican con un pañuelo blanco.
¿Qué fue este batallón específicamente?
Pues se dice que es un grupo paramilitar que andaban de civiles. Pues narran ahí pues los que estuvieron que traían ya sea un paño o un guante blanco, ¿no?, para identificarse. Que andaban de civiles con el cabello muy corto, por eso mucha gente los empezó a ver diferente.
¿Cree usted que se debería hacer mención de este batallón en los libros de texto?
Definitivamente, porque fue pues un grupo paramilitar ahí que se infiltraron, muchos de ellos haciéndose pasar por estudiantes, ¿no?, pues para atacar de raíz al movimiento, ¿no?
On the 18th of September, the army invaded the Ciudad Universitaria. At around 10 p.m., 10,000 soldiers in armored assault vehicles under the commands of General José Hernández Toledo and Gonzalo Castillo Urrutia occupied University City. About 1,500 students, teachers, and parents were arrested. On the 23rd, the UNAM's head dean of the engineering faculty, Javier Barros Sierra, decided to step down and resign. Some historians speculate that this was due to various death threats and continuous harassment by soldiers. All university voices, as well as 300 or more intellectuals and artists, were asking the governing board not to accept the resignation of the dean. On the 26th, the entirety of the UNAM's governing board decided the following. After a broad consultation, we have unanimously resolved not to accept the rector's resignation. The UNAM's faculty union declares that rejecting the rector's resignation is a first step towards resolving the conflict, but that further steps are necessary, such as the withdrawal of the army from the University of Mexico, the release of those detained, and an end to the repression. After several horrifying weeks and months, the students of the CEU are finally left alone. At a press conference at the Philosophy and Letters Center, the CNH declared, "The eviction of the CEU was due to pressure from the people. The student struggle belongs to the students and the people, and they have the right to ask the government to address the popular cries." Followers and spokespeople of the movement tried to remind everyone that the sentiment and demands were not towards the Olympics, and that the students simply wanted answers and the rights that were taken away from them so long ago. One would expect this information to be a full chapter in public school history books or a class to be taken at the college level. The reality is that we barely get any information covered in the textbooks. The first time a contemporary history book mentioned the event was in 1993, and it was for a 4th grade elementary level class. In this iteration, we have a very minuscule acknowledgement of the Tlatelolco student protest and the Olympic Games happening, which is located at the bottom portion of the page as a small timeline. When looking at the later editions of Mexican public school history books, I expected to find mentions of these bazooka shootings or the famous Olimpia Battalion. To my surprise, the information is nowhere to be found. The Secretaría de Educación Pública, or SEP, the main federal authority that oversees the national educational policies, books, and school standards, would later update their information in the 2011 5th grade public history book. This version acknowledges the effects of the Cold War as a possible cause for the revolts of the era and the hefty censorship of freedom of speech. We then read how young people demanded a new social order that would eliminate privileges and benefit the majority. These ideas of social change were described as leftist and disdained by those who considered that there was nothing to change. For this reason, they were repressed by the authorities of their countries with the consent of the majority of their fellow citizens, who did not recognize the value of their demands. The CEP acknowledges the importance of these demands, but other important data, like the various attempts to uphold public dialogue with the president, the Silent March of September, and the red and black flag that was hoisted at the center of El Zócalo as a symbol of rebellion and resistance, were nowhere to be found. Why would the CEP ignore this sensitive information?
Partamos todavía de algo Barba, que va más allá de esto. ¿Cuál es la intención de los gobiernos en general de estos libros de texto publicados por los gobiernos? La intención es, obviamente, y siempre será, legitimar al Estado actual. Claro. Siempre. La historia es utilizada para legitimar al Estado. La razón que yo le puedo encontrar es esta historia. La historia oficial, la que se da en las escuelas de educación pública en los niveles obligatorios, ¿no? En nuestros casos, primaria y secundaria. Claro. ¿No? Acá en México. Y ¿qué es lo que busca el Estado? Siempre va a ser legitimarse. Legitimarse como apropiándose de los héroes, apropiándose de movimientos y decir, yo Estado vengo de esos movimientos. Yo soy el resultado, el hijo de estos movimientos. El Estado obviamente no va a colocar las acciones que hizo o llevó a cabo en contra de su sociedad. Eso es algo contradictorio.
It wouldn't be until the 2nd of October that things would reach their final turning point. Thousands of students took to the streets to protest against government authoritarianism, which was presented in persecutions, kidnappings, torture, and murders against those who publicly showed their rejection. The ministry, headed by Luis Echeverría, responded by sending the army and its entire police structure to end the prolonged conflict. The main headlines read, 20 dead, 75 injured, and 400 apprehended. Media and other newspapers would report the following day with the same ambiguity as always.
El ejército ya estaba ahí reunido, el ejército oficial, por así decirlo. Se habían colocado
en techos, ¿no?
en los techos francotiradores y estaban resguardando, lo pongo entre comillas, la seguridad de los ciudadanos, todo entre comillas.
Sí.
Y bueno, pues miembros del Batallón Olimpia sabían perfectamente qué era lo que iban a hacer con esas armas. La situación es que pasa un helicóptero militar, tira unas bengalas, que era la señal de ataque para el Batallón Olimpia. Los miembros del ejército no sabían de esta situación. Ellos estaban ahí para resguardar la seguridad, eso era la orden. Mientras que el Batallón Olimpia tenía la otra orden, que era de causar desastre, caos, como caen las bengalas y ellos le disparan a los militares. Los militares ven que las personas que están disparando son civiles, que parecen estudiantes, dicen, los estudiantes nos están disparando. Sí. Entonces nosotros tenemos que defendernos. Y llevan a cabo un ataque hacia los manifestantes. Obviamente la sociedad civil, los estudiantes empiezan a correr, pero se dan cuenta que ya fueron rodeados desde un principio. Tratan de resguardar, muchos de ellos son capturados, son arrestados. Tratan de esconderse también en los departamentos. Sí. Muchas familias, al darse cuenta de esto, le abren la puerta a los estudiantes que estaban huyendo, los esconden en sus casas. Sucede lo que tenía que suceder. Me refiero a que el ejército entra a las casas, a los departamentos, a buscar a las personas, sin órdenes judiciales, obviamente. Y muchos sufren de estas consecuencias al rehusarse, a no dejarse, y no hay hasta ahorita una cifra oficial. Solamente se estima que hay alrededor de 300 desaparecidos. Se entiende que estos están obviamente muertos.
To no surprise, these events are not mentioned in any of the public history books of Mexico. The editions from 2014 throughout 2019 share the same outline and narration, and even the pictures are the same. Yet, the information doesn't make any effort to imply or suggest that the students of Mexico organize themselves in many different legal ways. This censorship and lack of care would increase with the latest edition of the public school history textbook, published in 2024. Instead of a couple of pages as previous editions had, we now have to piece together our narrative with 3 simple paragraphs that are scattered between other historical dates and events that left a mark. This not only harms the legacy of this movement, but it also minimizes the complexity and vast reach it had. The later editions of the books exclude the people from their own culture. We have completely ignored the efforts and challenges historians have faced just to bury these mass killings and develop this confusing narrative. The newer textbooks continue to ignore the involvement of Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, claiming that his government policies improved upon the financial status of the country.
¿Usted cree que recordar a Gustavo Díaz Ordaz como solo un presidente que trató de implementar un modelo económico nuevo en México es justo?
No. Hay muchos problemas que él no atendió, entre ellos el social.
The interviewed historians see this event as a planned assault towards the students, but sadly, there's still a few that believe the students to be the perpetrators.
¿Cree usted que esto fue una masacre espontánea o fue un evento planeado?
No, tiene todas las tendencias a que fue planeado, ¿no? Se para el 30 de septiembre y luego ya corre la voz de que el 2 de octubre en Tlatelolco no va a haber una reunión, una manifestación. Y pues yo creo que con los infiltrados, el mismo Batallón Olimpia y todo, pues prepararon todo. Ya era algo que ya traían preparado.
¿Esto fue una masacre espontánea o fue un evento planeado?
Fue un evento planeado.
¿Un evento planeado?
Sí, fue un evento planeado. Tenían el plan listo para ejecutarse. Jamás lo vamos a saber, pero creo que estaban esperando si se juntaba o no se juntaba mucha gente, si tenían la capacidad o no tenían la capacidad de reprimir por completo a tantas personas, pero el plan estaba ahí. Los francotiradores, el helicóptero, los paramilitares, los militares vestidos de civil, todo eso no se planea a las 2 de la tarde.
If we continue to narrow down our history books and skim over these piles of information, we will forget the 2nd of October.